Good afternoon, and welcome to the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn program. Our 2025 annual theme is a salute to veterans. This year, we will highlight and honor those who have served in the various branches of the United States military. This month is focused on missing in action and prisoner of war veterans. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Derek Abbey of Project Recover. Dr. Abbey, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Joy. Excuse me. All right, try and get out of the sunlight a little bit so you can see me. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Eisenhower Presidential Library for this incredible opportunity. It's a joy to join you right here in the heart of America. I actually live up in Bend, Oregon, so this is a little bit of a trip for me to get down here, but it's my first time here at the Eisenhower Library, and it's an absolute joy to share a little bit about the work of Project Recover with you. Slide. So as I mentioned, my name is Derek Abbey. I've been a part of Project Recover, and I'll talk about what Project Recover is for now more than 20 years. I also spent 23 years in the United States Marine Corps, so participating in a salute to veterans throughout as part of this programming throughout this 2025 year is an absolute pleasure for me. Our organization actually includes a number of veterans, and I'll point several of them out as we move through today's presentation. But I'm going to share a little bit about Project Recover, what it is we do, and the impact that we strive to create as an organization. Slide. So when people think about the end of World War II, many times they think about this: hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people flooding the streets in celebrations after years of long, hard-fought war, and hundreds of thousands of American service members returning home after years of war and the fatigue associated with that war. But what most people don't think about, slide, is the 100,000 of Americans that were missing in action at the end of World War II. Today, there still remains more than 72,000 are missing from that conflict. But people like Jay Manow, Anthony DePetta, and Wilbur Mitz were missing. Their families in New Jersey, in California, and West Virginia were waiting for answers of what happened to them, holding on to hope that they might have survived the war and are somewhere lost and will someday make their way home. But they were living with the ambiguous loss of those missing service members. Slide. Today, there's more than 81,000 American service members that remain missing in action. That does not include the thousands of service members that are missing off of our coasts, in our Great Lakes, in our mountain ranges related to training accidents. There's as many as 20,000 service members that are missing from training events or operational losses not associated with specific conflicts. And that translates today to about 5 million Gold Star MIA family members across our nation that are suffering with the ambiguous loss of their loved ones and still waiting to learn what happened. Slide. And that's where Project Recover comes in. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is simple. We search for Americans missing in action to recover them, repatriate them back to the United States, to their families and communities that have waited far too long, in order to provide those answers, hopefully some healing, and any bit of closure related to those losses. Now, it's a simple mission, but it's not that simple to execute. Slide. So when somebody is killed in action, or we tragically lose somebody close to us, most of us are familiar with what that experience is like. But it's very different when somebody goes missing. There's a scientific or psychological term associated with that called ambiguous loss, and we have witnessed over and over again how families deal with this. When somebody dies that is close to us, we have a ceremony around their loss, whatever our beliefs are, but we also do some things that are not so conscious. We have role changing that occurs within our families and the communities directly around us. We don't necessarily talk about it, but when that person is gone, other people step up and fill those roles. But when somebody goes missing, no matter how slim the chance might be, every single one of those family members holds on to some sort of hope that their loved one has survived. They have amnesia, they were rescued by natives, they're living another life, and someday they'll come home. No matter how slim that is, those families hold on to hope. And what we have seen is that interrupts the grieving process. That role changing does occur because they are holding on to the hope that they'll return. And when that grieving process is interrupted, that grief is passed from generation to generation to generation. And so working with families that have had MIAs missing for 8 decades, we've seen how impactful it is for generations that had never had an opportunity to even meet that person. They hold on to this myth of that missing family member, and they often have memorials to them in their homes, but they're still waiting for that person to come home. Slide. This is a uniquely American mission in the way that we approach those that are missing from our previous conflicts, and this goes all the way back to the Spanish-American War. During the Spanish-American War, the United States government decided that should you fall while you're wearing the uniform of our nation, the United States government will do everything that it can to bring you home at the cost of our government and our nation. Now, war is chaotic, and you can think of World War I and World War II with these cemeteries abroad. Every single one of those families was provided the opportunity to bring their loved ones home, but they decided that they would rest where they lay with their brothers and sisters in arms overseas. The number breakdown is often different than what most people think of. Most people, when they hear about prisoners of war missing in action, they immediately go to the Vietnamese conflict. But the greatest number of missing goes all the way back to World War II. Of the 81,000 that I mentioned, 72,000 are from World War II, another 7,000 from Korea, and less than 1,600 now in Vietnam and the surrounding countries associated with that conflict. We have a few missing from the Cold War, a few missing from Desert Storm, Desert Shield, but our most recent conflicts related to the global war on terror, we only have 2 service members that are missing from that in uniform. Some people, Americans, are missing that were not necessarily service members, and those 2 actually only happened last year when those 2 Navy SEALs went missing from the ship. Slide. So our efforts go back more than 3 decades, and it goes back to when Dr. Pat Scannon was on a separate mission, actually. He was in the nation of Palau in the South Pacific, and I'll talk about where Palau was, but he was with a small team that was searching for a Japanese trawler that was sunk during World War II, and it was sunk by a young Navy ensign named George Herbert Walker Bush, who would later on become President of the United States. There were rumors floating around that this trawler was unarmed, and so they went out to search for this trawler and actually found it relatively quickly. They found it on the ocean floor. It still was armed, but just on the ocean floor. But they found it so quickly that Pat had some time on his hands, and so instead of diving some of the most beautiful locations in the world, he hired a guide and asked the guide to just take him to some World War II stuff. The guide took him out in a boat, and he took him to this wing in shallow water, and Pat asked the question, what happened to the airplane? What happened to the crew? And the guy didn't have any answers. And so Pat took it upon himself to start investigating specifically this loss, and in doing so, started finding out that there were hundreds that remained missing from the fighting that took place in and around Palau, in the jungles, in their waters. There were 9 major air campaigns that took place over Palau, as well as the amphibious landing conducted by the Marines and soldiers on the island of Peleliu that many people are familiar with. But hundreds remained missing from that conflict. And Pat started to go back to Palau on his own to search the waters and the jungles to find some of these sites associated with these missing Americans. Quickly, he discovered this might not be the safest thing to be doing by yourself, so he started gathering like-minded individuals and created what was originally called the Bent Prop Project, which is now called Project Recover. And since this is a salute to veterans in 2025 for the Eisenhower Museum, I'll point out that Pat is an Army veteran. He served in the Army Medical Corps and then had an incredible career in science. Slide. So for those of you that don't know where Palau is, not a commonly discussed country, but there it is under that red star. It's in the South Pacific. It's about 500 miles to the east of the Philippines, about 500 miles to the southwest of Guam, if you're familiar with that island. But the small island nation is where fierce fighting took place, like many battles in the Pacific, and we still go to today searching for Americans missing in action. Slide. So our work, as I mentioned, is in the water. It's also in the jungles. But every single time we find a site that's associated with missing Americans, we'll hold a flag ceremony. We'll fold a flag. We'll speak their names. We'll record the event and say any words by members of that team that might be important to them in the moment. And our intention with that is we'll hold on to that token. So whenever those MIAs are recovered, identified, and returned to their families, at that point, we will deliver that flag to their families, which is on the site where their loved one was lost. A couple of other veterans in our team. Brock Stevens, he's one of our most recent members. He's one of our newest members. This is actually from 2 weeks ago. We were doing a water mission in the nation of Palau, documenting a site that we located associated with a Marine aviator, a Marine Corsair pilot. And that's Casey Doyle. He is actually finishing up a career in the United States Marine Corps, and I'll actually dive into his story a little bit later as we get into this presentation further. Slide. So what are we committed to? We believe that when you swear an oath to the Constitution and don the cloth of our nation, that we as Americans collectively make a promise to that individual and their family members that should you fall in battle, we'll do everything that we can to bring you home. And that promise does not have an expiration date. So that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to keep the more than 81,000 promises that still need to be kept because they don't have that expiration date. Giving back to those that have given the most, but also it's about educating the current generation and future generations and keeping these stories alive of those service members that we're looking for. Slide. This has an impact, believe it or not, from the individual level all the way up to the nation. At the individual level, when that promise is made, who is tasked with keeping that promise? Well, on the battlefield, it's the service member to the left and to the right. And they are incredibly impacted by this mission, especially when it's successful. So we have an individual impact on those service members, those actively serving, as well as veterans, but also families. The impact on families is pretty intuitive. I've already kind of discussed how this loss impacts them, and when they finally have answers, that myth has turned into a real hero. But then it expands to the communities around them. We've had the honor of attending these memorials and many times celebrations across the country, not only in Arlington National Cemetery, but in Portage, Pennsylvania, Findlay, Illinois, small town USA, all over the country. And what we've seen over and over again is these communities organically come out to embrace these families to celebrate their return. I had a colleague of mine that pointed out, we know every single day the freedoms that we live in because of the sacrifice made by service members before us and serving today. But when an MIA comes home, there's a second wave of impact that we experience, and that is through this healing and uniting impact that just organically occurs when we memorialize and celebrate them appropriately. And finally, at the national level, that promise is kept, and every time that promise is kept, trust has grown with our community, our citizens, and our nation. Something that's not so intuitive is we have seen this over and over again is when we go to these countries abroad and we work in them, this is where the battles took place. And these countries are still healing. And so when they initially experience us kind of showing up and kind of curious about what we're doing, and they realize that we're not searching for gold or treasure or something like that, that we're searching for people, very quickly there's a values overlap and it becomes their mission. They very much want to support it, but also be a part of it. And we have seen through their participation in helping us be successful with this mission, that healing impact is paralleled in those nations as well. Slide. So it's not just today, it's not just the past, it's the future generation. If we want our youth to continue to toe that line and swear an oath to the Constitution, we need to keep our promises and we need to do everything that we say we're going to do. There is a recruiting challenge for many of our services today, and so we believe by doing this work, we're building that trust with the next generation so they can continue to don the cloth of our nation and represent us and protect us. Slide. I already mentioned it's about the next generation, but it's also about youth. We have an education program called Skyward Bound, so we are working with sharing these stories and talking about an interdisciplinary mission like this that includes sciences like engineering and oceanography, but also soft sciences like history and archaeology, and coming together to accomplish something significant. And then bringing those groups together, you take one piece of that puzzle away and we're not successful. Sharing these stories with the next generation, again, to keep the stories alive, but also to bring them into our ranks as we continue to move forward. So we teach high school students. We have an official Skyward Bound high school student program, but we also work with college students, whether it's undergrad or graduate students, to help us advance this mission. We also have academic partners in the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the University of Delaware. We've done research projects with San Diego State, and we have a growing research project with the University of Georgia. Slide. So we're a nonprofit organization, but there's also a Department of Defense entity that has been tasked with accounting for missing Americans, and that is the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. They have been around in some capacity for several decades now, and we are an official part of that organization. So we are a standalone entity that's fully vertical in this space, meaning we do our own research, our own search missions, our own documentation missions, and recovery efforts in both the underwater environment and terrestrial environment. But we're also a partner of the Department of Defense, so they come to us from time to time to do any piece of that mission set throughout the year. Slide. So a little bit about underwater work and how that works. A little over 10 years ago, we started working with Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware, and it was a very serendipitous opportunity. We were both in Palau working on separate things, ran into each other at a colleague's lab. They asked, "What are you guys doing?" We asked, "What are you doing?" They had these incredible robots. We had a mission that they were very interested in, and so we started working with them, and the biggest thing that they provided to us to advance our mission was the use of automated underwater vehicles. And that's what that little torpedo-looking thing is. It has some sensors on it. You program it, you put it into the water, and it goes out like it's mowing a lawn, and it creates a pattern and maps out the ocean floor using sound waves. Like you see those camels, it shoots sounds, and then it creates an image from the shadows like you see on the right. And we review those images and then look for points of interest that we can dive using scuba dive or robots to investigate to determine first, is it man-made or not? If it's man-made, is it an aircraft or a site that we're looking for? And once we determine that, is it the actual site associated with missing Americans that we can further document and investigate? Now, prior to this, we were just using scuba online, and that there is a lifetime of work in one harbor to utilize using scuba. But when we got to working with Scripps and UDEL, we could take those robots in about a 4-week period. We could cover about 20 square kilometers, which is like flying to the moon. It was an incredible advancement to us. 10 years ago, the resolution was about 1 meter. Now, today, it has advanced so rapidly that we can do about 100 square kilometers in the same amount of time, and the resolution is now down to 1 centimeter. So a couple years ago, I was up off the coast of Maine. We were searching for a lost naval aviator who had crashed off the coast, and we were reviewing the side scan sonar imagery, and on the ocean floor, you could see the lobster traps where the lobster fishermen were trying to catch their lobster. But what's interesting about that is now this technology is being utilized to find and collect lost lobster and crab traps that are all over our coasts that are having a horrible impact on the environment and the fishing industry. So if we can collect those traps, that saves millions of sea life, good for the dinner plate as well, if you like lobster or crab. But it's really neat to see the second, third order effects of our work taking place across the world, really. I realize I'm standing in the sun. Slide. So there's some of the other robots that we use. We don't only use the automated underwater vehicles. We also use remote controlled operated vehicles. If it's a really deep site or something like that, and we don't want to send a diver down, or if there's something unsafe otherwise, we can utilize other robots to investigate these points of interest to determine if they're man-made or the sites that we're actually looking for as well. Some of the things that we're also using is it takes a lot of time to review that imagery. So now we're starting to implement machine learning and AI to review it for us so that it can pull out the points of interest and then we can just go investigate them. Slide. So I mentioned we work with high school students. There's not a college, but a high school in central Michigan called Stockbridge High School that has worked with us for about 5 missions. They found out about our mission. They had a small robotics team that build robots in their high school classroom, but it's a really small high school. They build underwater robots that don't even have a swimming pool. So they would drag in a cow trough from one of the local fields, and that's where they would test the robots to determine if they were waterproof. And then they would go to one of the neighboring high schools when they needed a little bit more depth for a swimming pool. But they built their robots, they did all their fundraising themselves, and they've been able to join us on 5 different missions. And actually, this is the first robot that they created, that little thing down there. This is not an MIA site. This is actually a Japanese seaplane that was lost that's resting on the ocean floor. But I happened to be down there and catch a photo of it. But pretty impressive stuff. Now, the first students that went with us are doing some pretty incredible things with their lives around engineering and other robotics. This was just the spark that allowed them to excel and move into the future. And it's just very, very special to be a part of that. Slide. So I told you where Palau was. For a long time, we were doing 1 mission a year, all self-funded, out of pocket. We would go execute about a 4-week mission in Palau. And at the end of it, we would all circle up, pull out our wallets and say, you owe this, you owe that, you owe this. Well, things have changed quite a bit. We have grown as an organization. We've had a lot of success in finding sites and repatriating Americans. And that has allowed our nonprofit to grow. And that's allowed us to be successful with fundraising. And we've been able to send multiple teams to the field, multiple missions a year, multiple teams to the field, sometimes in parallel. So we started in Palau, but now, slide, we're a worldwide presence. So I just came back from Palau. We have a team heading to Germany here soon, another team heading to Chuuk later on in the year. We've done work in Vietnam. Some of our most recent repatriations have come from that conflict. We're really all over the world. Last year, we did our first mission in Africa, which is a really interesting case because it's a C-47 that was lost that has 22 service members on board, 18 of which are female soldiers from World War II. More than half of the female MIA population was on this aircraft, and we have really, really good information, and we're hoping to locate them and bring them home. And when you map them over the United States, they cover both coasts and right down the heart of the nation, and so we're really excited about finding success with that mission. Slide. So what's next? I've kind of already hinted to some of that. We're working on more technology. So believe it or not, the water technology has advanced faster than the land technology. Today, the best thing I have when I go into the jungle are boots on my feet, a machete in my hand, and I keep an old school compass in my pocket because many times the GPS is blocked out, so you have to know how to navigate off of a real compass, which some people don't know how to do that. So it's important to have that. But now we're working on some technology that will allow us to test soil and tell you if humans have been buried there. Theoretically, in the future, if we have the gene sequence, I can take a soil sample and tell you who is buried in that point. And that's really going to help us a lot with infantry losses around the world and things like that. It's a lot easier to find an aircraft and then the crew that's associated with that aircraft than it is to find somebody that was an infantry loss or prisoners of war that were executed and intentionally hidden when they were buried. But that's some of the things that we're working on. I already mentioned we're scaling, we're using more drone technology. One thing that's really interesting is actually coming from the agricultural side of things is in very, very dense jungle, we can take an image of it and use multispectral analysis to determine if that jungle has been compromised by an aircraft crash that had oil or gas or things like that, because the vegetation will have eaten that up in its leaves, and we'll be able to pull that out through sensors and then go, again, kind of like we're doing underwater, investigate a point of interest, if we can navigate to it, on land in the same way that we're doing it underwater. So some pretty impressive stuff. And last year we did 15 missions in 2024. We want to move beyond that. And my goal as the president and CEO is to scale our organization to do as many as 30 missions a year. And that's not scaling for scaling's sake. It's scaling because time is not our friend. The more time that passes, the more these sites erode, the more human development occurs. And depending on where that development is taking place, if they encroach on a site, they may or may not report it. And so we're working really hard to get more and more teams into the field so we can provide more answers to these families. Slide. So I mentioned Casey already. We got some extra time, so I'll add a couple anecdotes. Casey is a member of our team. I mentioned to you already, he's a United States Marine. But he's also more than that. His grandfather, Jimmy Doyle, slide, was part of a B-24 crew during World War II. That B-24 was lost over Palau, and in 2004, Project Recover, previously the BEMPROP project, located this site, and 8 of that crew were recovered, identified, repatriated back to their families, to include his grandfather, Jimmy Doyle. And after the ceremonies took place Casey approached us and said, you've given so much to our family. How can I give back? Is there any way I could become a team member? Well, you can't say no to that, right? So Casey became the first Gold Star MIA family member to be also a member of our team. And since then, we've added multiple members. As I mentioned, he's also finishing up his career in the United States Marine Corps, but it's an absolute joy to have on our team. And an example of veterans that just continue to serve and want to give back. Slide. Here's that side scan sonar image from before. It's not always as easy as this, but if you look in the lower left-hand corner or quadrant of that image, you can see something that looks like the fuselage of an airplane. Usually it's not that easy. Usually it's like that looks like it might be a pile of something because many times these crashes were very, very violent. But in this case, it looks pretty much like an airplane. Slide. And it certainly was. This is what it looks like at the bottom of the ocean. So we dove on this, we investigated, and when we first looked at it, we're like, well, we don't know what kind of aircraft this is. This isn't an American aircraft. So we had to investigate it for a while. It had these kind of rotating propellers on it. So after doing some research, we discovered what this was, and it's a Japanese norm. In investigating it, we learned that there was only 9 of them that were made operational. They were all destroyed in World War II, and this is the only one that we knew of in existence. So people that are interested in aviation and stuff like that got really excited about this. Now, fast forward to 5, 6, 7 years later, we were doing some work in Chuuk and found a second Japanese norm. So we know that there's 2 in existence, and somehow we were the ones that found both of them. The one in Chuuk is actually known. This one's protected in Palau, but a lot of people actually dive the one in Chuuk. Slide. It has that spooky black coral growing off of it. This is a 2-crewed aircraft, and you can still see the machine gun pointed out the back portion of the cockpit there on this Japanese norm. Slide. So this is related to the UDT and the SEAL community. On the upper left, that photo includes 3 UDT members, and until last year, they were the only 3 UDT or SEAL members that were missing in action. They were captured off of the island of Yap during World War II, transported to Palau, where they were ultimately executed. This is a case that we have worked on for a long time. Lots of people are interested in it. We're doing a campaign behind it, and this is actually just from a couple weeks ago. I already pointed out Brock, who's on the left there, but there's a couple other veterans in there besides me and Pat. Nick Zaborski, he's a U.S. Navy veteran. He's a U.S. Navy diver, so he is very much out of his element here in the jungle, as I like to say. But Nick is also special because he leads an organization called Legion Undersea Services. And before we started doing recovery efforts, we would just do search, location, and documentation parts of the mission. But we have since moved into the recovery side of things. And Nick was one that really helped us advance and become the gold standard when it comes to non-government organization MIA recovery. He was a Navy diver, and when he was in the Navy, he actually worked on the site that I showed you earlier related to Jimmy Doyle, Casey Doyle's grandfather. And when he got out of the Navy, we maintained that relationship, and he had the opportunity to work with us and continue to work on this mission. And when you ask him, he'll say over and over again that this is the best mission he's ever been a part of. And we're lucky to have him because he's really advanced our efforts and our capabilities. And we put him in the jungle every once in a while. Other person on that photo, Josh Evans, this was his first mission. He's also a veteran, Marine Corps aviator, C-130 pilot, but also flew for the Navy. His first mission. And this is us in the jungle, and you might look at us and think, well, why do we have all those tarps and everything up? Well, we were doing that science that I was telling you about. We weren't worried about COVID or anything when we were in those masks. That's actually to not contaminate the soil that we're working with. So we were taking some soil samples and then screening the DNA that's actually in that soil and testing it at a lab in the University of Georgia. So doing all sorts of stuff, but those 3 still remain missing. They're also co-located with some other MIA, some aviators, as well as some Catholic priests and civilians, and we're working really hard to determine where their burial site is. Slide. So when you go through the jungle or when you're diving underwater, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but every once in a while you'll see something that just reminds you, why you're doing this mission. And it could be as simple as you see a piece of aluminum in the jungle. And many times, after decades, it's just bleached to the aluminum color underneath or the silver underneath, but then you flip it over and there's some blue paint on the other side that tells you, oh, this is an American aircraft. Reminds you of the people that we're searching for. We were previously called the Bent Prop Project, and every time we find an aviation site, every single one of our members at some point will walk by or swim by and touch the propeller of the aircraft, just knowing that this was what was driving them through the air before they were lost. Or something like this on an Avenger site on Peleliu, and looking through the wreckage and finding a spoon. This one really gets to me, this teaspoon with USN for U.S. Navy carved into it. And when I was in the Marine Corps and I was deployed or in the field, I always kept a spoon in my pocket, because if and when I had an opportunity to eat, I was a Marine, but I wanted to have a utensil. So instead of just using my fingers, I had this spoon always available. And I think that sailor was, took it from the chow hall before he went on his mission, or was looking forward to getting back to that chow hall after the mission, and unfortunately never made it. But we located that site and unfortunately have not recovered the crew. We're still working on that. But we did recover the dog tag that you saw in the middle of that photograph from Paul Binsman. And his family actually celebrated him in just knowing that this is ultimately what happened to him. Because they had that dog tag, they felt like they had the answers. Even though we're still looking for what happened to him, they knew ultimately what happened to him. The story is now complete. We just need to bring him home. Slide. Other things you might find, this is John Marsack, also U.S. Navy veteran. This is actually when we were doing an underwater recovery site just over a year ago. And we've had this happen twice, where we have found nickels. This is a 1945 nickel that we pulled up. We were screening through everything. And again, every once in a while, you find something, and it just reminds you that we're looking for people, not just wreckage or things like that. John Marsack is actually Nick's partner. He's the other lead for Legion Undersea Services that have helped us advance our underwater recovery effort, and is fully committed to this mission. Also a former U.S. Navy diver. Slide. I like to share this article. This is actually a ramp ceremony, but this newspaper is not an American newspaper. This is actually a Palauan newspaper, and we do ramp ceremonies in the United States, typically in Hawaii, maybe Nebraska at the lab there, Dover, you might have seen them. Rarely do pretty much never do ramp ceremonies occur in the nation when we're recovering remains or bringing somebody home. That was not the case in Palau. When we found William Pennell and recovered his remains, the president of Palau demanded that a ramp ceremony take place in Palau before William Pennell departed. And what was interesting in this is a DoD recovery team, and when they go to the jungle to recover, they don't bring their uniforms with them. And so they had to have their uniforms shipped out to Palau so they could conduct this ramp ceremony. And it was attended by the president, all their political leaders, their tribal leaders, as well as several citizens, to show the respect that they have for the sacrifice made by the Americans during World War II, and to show that this is the reason that they have their country today. Slide. So that brings us back to Jay Manow, Anthony DePetta, and Wilbur Mitz. I introduced them to you in the very beginning. The good thing is these stories have closed. Just last October, we were able to celebrate and memorialize Jay Manow in West Virginia. Slide. And the year before that, we were able to celebrate and memorialize Anthony DePetta and Wilbur Mitz. In West Virginia last year, it was the first time in 80 years that the families had come together. And this is all three nieces that were able to join for a celebration and memorial of not only Manow, but all three members of that crew. Slide. This is what success looks like to us. Not what you might expect, but it is that caisson in Arlington National Cemetery or small town USA, wherever it happens to be across the nation. It's kids lining the street, getting lit out of school on a cold, rainy November day, holding their hands over their hearts with flags, or Sister Joe finally receiving her flag that we've held on to for years. That's the whole reason we do this mission. Slide. A little bit closer to home, just over a month ago, we had this announcement from the Heaven Can Wait crew. Lieutenant Tennyson, who was on the Heaven Can Wait team, he's from Wichita, Kansas. On February 24th, they announced his identification. We located the Heaven Can Wait B-24 in Papua New Guinea a few years back, but it was so deep that the Navy Experimental Dive Unit had to conduct the recovery. And what they do is they go down deep into the ocean. They live on the ocean floor for a couple weeks at a time at hundreds of feet of depth and go out every single day to do the recovery effort. And then at the end, they do their final decompression and come out. But they were able to recover Lieutenant Tennyson, who will be memorialized hopefully right here in Kansas sometime in the near future. Slide. So some numbers for you. We have done more than 100 missions around the world. We've been to more than 25 countries now, located and documented more than 70 aircraft, and that has translated to more than 300 missing Americans. Of that 300, 70 have been declared buried at sea by the United States Navy, meaning they're in a spot where the Navy knows where they're at, their family knows where they're at, but the assumption is they will not be disturbed and they'll rest where they lay in accordance with Navy tradition. 25 have been repatriated, and the remainder of that number is in some sort of open status, meaning we've conducted recovery efforts and they're going through the identification process now, or a recovery effort needs to take place. And the good thing is we're adding to those numbers every single day at a more rapid pace every single day. If you want to learn more, besides just me talking, there's an incredible documentary out there called To What Remains. It's all on your favorite streaming platforms if you like that, or you can order a DVD off of Amazon. But it really highlights our work, most importantly, the impact that this work creates on families and communities across the nation. So look it up if you have time. It's all out there on the internet. You can even find it on YouTube and watch it for free if you like. Slide. So not everybody can go out into the jungles around the world or dive to various corners of our country, but we can all spread the word. And so if you want, we're a nonprofit, so we always look for the support of and generosity of the public, but we also want to get the word out there. So events like this are incredibly valuable to us because not everybody knows that this mission is even taking place or that there's more than 80,000 Americans still missing. So if you have a group that you would like to have share this message, please let us know and we can work with you on that. We also have a Mission Miles program that allows people across the country to put in movement over the month of September to bring awareness to this mission and help bring people home. And we're able to screen the film if you have an audience that would like to see the film or see more about our work. Imperative Entertainment owns that movie, but they gave us full permission to use it to advance this mission. Slide. I already said, what can you do? Please be an ambassador for the organization. If you are an MIA family member or you know of a Gold Star MIA family member, we want to hear from them. We don't actively reach out to families, but when they reach out to us, we collect any information that they have and we share any information that we might have. And you never know what is in a Foot Locker in somebody's basement or in somebody's attic. It might be that one piece that we need to solve this case. That is the Heaven Can Wait crew. That's Lieutenant Tennyson right there, second from the left in the front row. Lieutenant Kelly all the way over on the right has been recovered. This crew, the families had stayed connected for decades, and they had all this information when we were on our way to Papua New Guinea. They just somehow found us, and I don't believe in coincidences. They contacted us and said, if you ever find yourself in Papua New Guinea, we have family members that are missing there, and we have this information. Well, we took that information and we were able to find their loved ones. So we want to hear from them. We're a volunteer-based organization, so if you know people that have capability and availability to advance this mission, we want to hear from them. And of course, everybody can give a couple bucks from their couch. Slide. If you want to learn more, we're on the social medias. We're on websites, projectrecover.org. Please follow us, share our work with your colleagues and friends, stay up to date on the stories of more Americans that we're bringing home. And lastly, I just want to say thank you again to the Eisenhower Presidential Library for having me, for allowing us to share this mission. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and many veterans, or when people take off the uniform, there's this perceived loss of value in finding a new mission or a new mission of purpose. I was lucky enough to have started this relationship with Project Recover when I was still in uniform. I would save up my leave, and that's what I would do on my leave. And so when I finally took the uniform off, that perceived loss of value wasn't the case for me. This is a very, very purposeful mission. We have several veterans on our team. It's not required to be a veteran. we listen to anybody that's interested in being a part of it. But it turns out that a lot of veterans and first responders are attracted to the mission for reasons that I think are obvious. But slide. I think we have a little bit of time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Are there any questions in the audience? And I'll also say to our online audience, if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We are monitoring that as well. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, you can write it down. I'll come get it
There's a
from
question
you.
here.
Oh, where? Oh, sorry. Hold on.
How far back do you go? I know you said 1898, but how far back do you go? You go as far back as the Civil
Yeah.
War, or is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, the question was, how far do we go back? So the 1898 was when the United States made the commitment. We have worked all the way back to World War II, but we search and work on cases wherever the information takes us. So science, and we use the scientific process to advance this. So we're constantly doing research related to losses. Most of the losses are World War II, so we've done most of our work around World War II, but we've gone all the way up to missions related to Desert Storm. And we would go older. So if somebody came forward or we found information related to a World War I loss, that made sense for us to prioritize that mission, put resources to searching for and potentially recovering, we would do so. Last year, actually, we were contacted by somebody that had information related to frontier losses. So mid-19th century here in the United States. And he had really, really good information. And we started to work with him on these losses, 3 individuals in Wyoming. And we hit a roadblock, believe it or not, related to property access. But we still have that information. If we have the opportunity in the future, we will investigate that further. It was well documented when they were lost, where they were buried. So our hope is that we'll be able to go and locate that site, ultimately document that, and then recover those individuals.
Has the World War I Museum in Kansas City talked with you, and is that an area that you've pursued?
We haven't pursued it, and the museum hasn't reached out to us specifically. But like I said, if somebody came forward and said there's some losses related to World War I or really any other conflict, we would look into it. I will highlight, and I didn't mention this, but so the Department of Defense, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, they're tasked with accounting for missing Americans that are missing in action. Now, training accidents, believe it or not, those service members are not necessarily designated missing in action if they're not associated with an active conflict that we were participating in. And so this is kind of just an administrative error, if you will, and I know that the Department of Defense is trying to work on this, but many training losses, one specifically that we're working on right now related to 8 service members that were lost off the coast of Texas, they're not designated MIA. So the Department of Defense, believe it or not, cannot put resources towards searching for and looking for them. We don't have that same restriction. They are still missing to their families just as much as somebody that's lost in combat. And so we incorporate those training losses within our mission and put forth effort. Now, the research is a little bit more difficult because the records are not kept the same. But in this case, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to find this site. It's a B-52 loss, so a really big aircraft in the water. So we're in the fundraising stage now to get that search mission underway. Great questions. Thank you.
Oh, hold on, I'm coming.
Excuse me. Do y'all have a liaison set up in case you encounter remains of former combatants, enemy combatants that we would encounter?
Great question. So the question is about if we find former enemy combatants. Yes. So we don't necessarily have an active liaison, but we have a process for that. We often find things that we're not looking for to include former enemy and enemy remains, potential enemy remains. And so when we do find a site that is, well, not just enemy, allies or otherwise, we will document it, and then we will turn that information over to the appropriate nation, typically through the State Department, through their embassy and our embassy, to make sure that they have the information. And so to kind of add on to that, we have found several aircraft that we found German, Japanese, We found ally aircraft as well. Some of them associated with missing, some of them not. We found sunken vessels with sailors on them. And anytime we do that, if it's not American, we document it and then we turn that information over to the appropriate agency associated with that country. Great question. Yeah, we often find sites that we're not planning on. So we not only modern sites, we found ancient sites in the middle of the jungle, which, you know, our archaeologists get really excited, and we get excited too, but we're really looking for, you know, the people. So we're like, okay, that's kind of cool, and then we'll move on to the next thing. But we do find all sorts of neat things that we're not planning on looking for.
How would somebody contact your organization if you had a family member that was missing and had information to share with you guys?
Yeah, it's a one-stop shop. So it's all through our website, projectrecover.org, and I can give you a card if you want to take that with you. But projectrecover.org is our website, and there's a link on there they'll funnel you to the right person. We are a small organization, so we have a whopping 5 on our staff, and the rest of it is volunteer. So I just ask for patience, and anytime you reach out, we will get back to you, I promise, but sometimes it just takes a little bit of time.
Any other questions?
We had a recovery of Father Capon, who is from Pilsen. He was an Army chaplain. Were you involved in that?
I was
at
not
all?
involved in that one. No,
Okay. They had found his remains.
Yeah, there's a lot of effort taking place, and mostly from the Department of Defense, but there are some organizations out there, some other nonprofits out there that are putting forth efforts. Some of them are regionally focused, where they focus on one area, or they might take one piece of that mission set that I outlined earlier. There's also a number of university partners that are doing work out there, but no one that I know of that is as fully vertical as we are, and really around the world, and underwater and terrestrial, so all sorts of different stuff.
Any other questions? We do have a little time.
In the 40s, there was a local Army air base in Harrington, Kansas. It was a staging area for the B-24s and B-29s. I'm just curious if you would have had any recoveries that would trace back to Harrington, Kansas.
Oh boy, you put me on the spot with that one. I don't know off the top of my head, but very likely, because we've looked for both B-24 and B-29s. The B-29s are a little bit more, they're not as broad around the world as the B-24 was during World War II. I would guess the answer is yes, but I cannot say for sure. And I do have one other anecdote if we have time. So you might be like, oh, well, he's a Marine. How did he get involved in this? I actually got involved in this message through another veteran group. So in 2003, I was in a Marine fighter squadron, VMFA 121 in San Diego, and had just come back from a deployment to the Middle East, and our phone rang in our ready room, and our duty answered it, and I was a historical officer for the squadron, so they gave me the phone, and I answered the phone, and on the other end was a gentleman named George Burianic, and he was a World War II veteran, and he was reaching out because he's like, I'm putting together a reunion. We do this every year, different locations across the country. I'm just calling to see if you have any contact information from World War II veterans of the squadron. And I said, we don't have any information like that at the squadron, but it sounds like it's pretty cool what you're doing. You're meeting in Indiana. And I said, well, can I come? He's like, yeah, come on out. And so me and another Marine took a F-18 out to Indiana and met with the World War II cadre. And they said, this is amazing. Tell us about the Middle East and F-18s. And we said, who cares about F-18s in Iraq? Tell us about World War II and Corsairs. And they said, who cares about World War II and Corsairs? And it was really a connection across time. And it was just an event that was incredible for me. And while I was there, they said, you need to meet this man, Pat Scannon, who I highlighted earlier. He's doing this work in the South Pacific, Palau. He comes to these reunions every year and gives us an update, and also interviews the veterans for information. Well, Pat and I missed each other by about 20 minutes that year because I had to get back to the West Coast or something. But I said, next year why don't we hold this reunion in San Diego? We'll have the old squadron, we'll have the new squadron. Again, a connection across time. And that was when I met Pat. Pat and I became fast friends. He invited me to be in the organization. I became a proud member, but I was deploying quite a bit at the time. So it took me a while to go on my very first mission. And so in 2007, I came back from another deployment to the Middle East, unpacked my sea bag, packed a suitcase, and met the team in Palau for my first Project Recover mission. And we were searching the jungles and the waters of Palau, and we found an MIA site. We found a Marine Corps SARE site in a very, very dense mangrove jungle. I still have no idea how we were able to find it, but I was part of finding an MIA on my very first mission. And that MIA was a member of my squadron from World War II. And so I was hooked, as you can imagine. And then from there just grew as I was a team member, became a team lead, ultimately became a board member, and now for about 5.5 years now, I've been the president and CEO. So it's amazing how these veteran relationships kind of lead to some pretty amazing things.
All right. Any other questions? All right. And I don't see any questions online, so I will say thank you so much again, Dr. Abbey. And if
My
everybody
pleasure.
will hang out for just a few minutes for some closing remarks, then we will, yes, please clap.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. So thank you again for joining us. If you would like to learn more about Project Recover or MIA POW veterans, please check out the Ike Library YouTube channel, where you will find a new episode of our Real series, The Whole Shebang, History in a Minute. Our new Club Eisenhower podcast episode will post on Monday, March 31st. You can find the episode featuring Dr. Abbey in a more in-depth conversation on our website or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We want to thank our program sponsors, the Eisenhower Foundation and the Jeff Cope Memorial Foundation. We invite you back next month, where we will welcome Dr. Jason Lancer for a special Lunch and Learn and an evening program on Holocaust Remembrance Day. As a reminder, there are surveys on your table that will help us improve. And if you are joining us virtually, there's a link for a digital survey in the program description. As always, you can find more information about our programs on our website, eisenhowerlibrary.gov, where you can join our mailing list. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.